place is nowhere. And it's forever. Ghosts of my life.
Investigation. You'll handpick your own officers.
To the Super Squad.
I'm a journalist. I'm doing this article about parents of children who have gone missing. Do you feel that the police could have done anything more to have helped you?
Yeah, there was one thing.
Right, what was that?
They could have found my daughter.
Alright, that is the trailer for 1974 Red Riding series, which we're going to be discussing this week.
It's one of them made for BBC movies that then they made like 3 movies, but they're sort of a 1-episode season / movie.
Yeah, it reminded me of Sherlock.
Yeah, it's kind of like Sherlock, except like more just a movie.
But the essay is called Can the World Be as Sad as It Seems? David Peace and His Adapters. And we'll give a little context now. Who's David Peace?
David Peace is a true crime writer who wrote a series of 4 books called the Red Riding series that were all named different years, and they followed like interweaving stories that were essentially tied together vaguely by these actual serial killings of children and women that took place in Yorkshire in the 70s and 80s.
Right. I was watching these movies and I thought it was gonna be about the Yorkshire Ripper.
It's like weird fucking sort of proto-true detective anthologies while there's a Yorkshire killer.
Well, I'm using this term lightly, but postmodern in that way. You know, in that it takes historical events and writes a story inside those historical events.
Yeah.
A fictional story. It's not like All the President's Men where it's following the events as it fictionally happened or really happened but fictionalized. It's making up
very much an entirely weird made-up story that is occurring while the Yorkshire killings are taking place and people are discussing the Yorkshire killings. And things are happening related to the Yorkshire killings, but yeah, it's really not the focus of the show.
Right, but before we get into that, we should probably explain...
Or books.
...what the Yorkshire Ripper was.
I don't know. He was a serial killer in Yorkshire. Do you have anything more on that?
His name is Peter Sutcliffe.
Sutcliffe.
He worked as a gravedigger for a while. Same kind of serial killer profile. He was
so he's like an iterant male who never held down a job and then like serial killed.
Oh yeah, he apparently just liked to watch prostitutes and Johns like voyeuristically and then became fixated on them and started killing prostitutes at a certain point. And I think he killed...
And also seeming like children?
No, he did not. Although the youngest one was 14.
Okay.
So they were like teenage prostitutes.
Okay.
And that's where the fictionalization kind of comes in with this. But yeah, and what ended up happening, the context for why this is...
Well, if you want to know about the Yorkshire killings, do not watch the BBC adaptation of the Red Riding series.
You won't...
Or probably read the books.
Yeah, you won't learn anything about it. But the presumption is that most people watching it will have a very intimate knowledge. Kind of like people in Milwaukee about Dahmer.
Right, because all of England is the size of Milwaukee.
Yeah. The thing is that the police kind of fucked up. Famously did a very incompetent job. They interviewed the Yorkshire Ripper 9 times over the 5 years, and they still didn't have enough to hold him. And it's one of the most expensive police hunts in England's history. It took 4 or 5 years and rotating cast of people. And this series kind of plays with the incompetency of the police force and the corruption of the police force. The West Yorkshire, apparently are very notorious for their...
Wasn't it the North Yorkshire?
Well, I think...
Or is that in the book?
I looked it up, and the West Yorkshire is the name of it, but they call themselves From the North.
I think it's just north of England shit. But yeah, so I assume they were just referring to the North generally.
Yeah, so David Peace wrote 4 books.
3 of which got made into a BBC thing. And then he wrote another book unrelated to that got made into a movie that Mark Fisher also talks about.
Right.
So anyway, he starts this chapter out first acknowledging the influences of James Ellroy, another true crime author, LA Confidential, etc., that Peace referred to as his Sex Pistols moment. You know, Manchester, blah, blah, blah. So Elroy's definitely an influence on Peace, but he identifies a major difference between the two. Mark identifies a major difference between the two. He calls Elroy a Hobbesian conservative who essentially sees the grit and darkness of the world as inevitable, if not almost desirable, and the need for morally ambiguous authoritarian police as a fact of life, whereas Peace does not.
Yeah, he says acceptance is the thing, like that.
Peace.
Elroy accepts violence as a pragmatic approach, whereas Peace has no acceptance of it.
Yes, his stories and characters fight against it, even if it seems daunting. So, I mean, he kind of gets into the whole hauntological and the triple sense thing.
Yeah, the next section is, how are these works hauntological?
He says hauntological in the triple sense, and then both me and Steve noticed he definitely named 2 things.
Yeah, and it's not...
There was this really long second thing, but it's not clear where the third thing is. Anyway, the first way it's hauntological is because he kind of identifies an inherent hauntologicalness of murder mystery and true crime in general, what Quentin Milsu calls the odious death, which is a way of saying a murder, a premature death, and you're haunted by the literal lost future of if that person didn't die. And he kind of lays that out a little bit. Readers are put into the position of spectral mourners by the voices of those who had died odiously, the Ripper's victims. Yeah, so that's way number 1.
He compares it with the Sonic hauntology.
Hauntology as a musical criticism.
Which
theory.
he says is different for David Peace because his is a past without crackle. Crackle, as we've discussed in previous episodes, is what Mark Fisher points to as the absent presence in modern music.
And I think here he's also kind of contrasting with Life on Mars as well, where, I mean, the crackle is the Arctic monkeys putting effects to make it sound as if it was recorded in the 80s, but really not. They almost just are at this point are a total simulacrum, and they sound like they're recorded in the 2000s with the 80s effect on.
Yeah.
Which was very much Life on Mars, whereas this really wasn't, and interestingly also had a hilarious racist.
Yeah. Okay, so a little
whole
bit...
scene with hilarious 70s racist Englishmen.
Right.
Says a bunch of cool words.
Let's talk about that, because I think it's good to showcase the different ways, because Gene Hunt from Life on Mars, the character that's the racist...
Well, I think part of the interesting difference is the need for him to be challenged from someone from the 2000s, whereas the acknowledgement that even at the time there were people who also found this poor behavior.
Yeah.
Like, it's almost like, it's not that he's a bad man, he's just of this time. Whereas this is like, the main character is also from the 70s and thinks this guy's an asshole.
Yeah, the main character played by Andrew Garfield.
Yeah, Andrew Garfield's in this movie playing really fun.
Well, he's in
Pop
one of the
Garfield.
movies.
Well, he's a reporter.
In 1974,
Yeah.
is a reporter, and
he's a crime reporter reporting on the crime, but there's a corrupt Yorkshire police department. Another way this contrasts, I'll say, is I feel like Life on Mars, you're like left wondering, like, hey, after this guy like just shows up and like starts letting people they arrested go and stuff, why don't the cops just corner him in an alley and beat the shit out of him? Whereas in this, they absolutely do that.
well, yeah, that's the thing about 1974 is it is like an Andrew Garfield
Anyway,
torture
yeah,
porn
Andrew
movie.
Garfield gets the shit kicked out of him. So you contrast it with the music hantology. It almost feels like Mark Fisher is impressed with this simulation of the past he's presented with. He kind of, it has the lived-inness that was lacking from the Tinker Tailor movie and lacking from Life on Mars.
I mean, it's really well done.
Yeah, it is actually quite well done.
We were discussing it as we were watching. We watched
We only
19
watched 1974.
See, I saw 1980 and 1983 as well, and 1980 is even darker than the 74 one.
Mm-hmm.
It is just direly dour and just completely depressing.
So what was the third version of the third way it was hauntological?
Well, the third way, we kind of discuss it. It's, didn't you say like the sonic hauntology? He uses the music in it have the Madeline effect that was missing from...
well, I mean, he talks about like throbbing gristle.
Right. But he says that that kind of transports you into the time period, even if David Peace doesn't necessarily like the music. He uses it to kind of add that darkness that the time period is trying to evoke. Yeah, he discusses Throbbing Gristle and Total Eclipse of the Heart. He uses all these pop culture and underground references to give this kind of what he calls Gnostic interpretation of the 70s. And I think now we can probably talk...
I mean, I also will just say he does specifically use the term anti-nostalgic, anti-Life on Mars.
Right, yeah.
His very direct feelings about why he included the essays about life on Mars and
almost dialectically.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you know, point of fact, police brutality hinders their ability to solve the mystery. In this case, quite markedly and quite clearly, and not in some weird hippie way, but just they're not good police. They're just a gang of assholes who like exerting power. They're not trying to solve the mystery.
And their corruption makes them blind to who it is.
They're not looking because they don't care, because they're not there to solve the mystery. They're there to just be cops and protect their own power. And that's its vision of cops in the 70s.
And the 1981 specifically is they like bring in one of the guys who's corrupt and trying to put up roadblocks in front of every single avenue to basically tank the investigation.
Yeah, well, 1974 also has this fucking hot fuzz guys trying to build a mall plot to it, which is kind of fun.
Sean Bean plays a like entrepreneur or
he like runs the cops and runs the city and is like trying to build a mall or something.
Yeah, he's like a super millionaire.
Vaguely related to a serial killer, I guess. I don't know. But you know, it's a hell of a good time.
He says jippos. That's the important part.
They say jippos in this a lot, actually. They say it a large number
what
of
is
times.
what is going on? Why they say jippos is because
they're trying to build a mall and there's jippos in the way of the mall.
And the cops need to burn down the jippo houses.
Yeah, that's happening.
Or vans, I guess.
Yeah,
right?
They round up patties and jippos. They like rounding up patties and jippos in this show. Yeah, you know, they say like a lot of words, but yeah, it is not there for exploitation or voyeurism or nostalgia in the way that Life on Mars is.
And the last point about this is the Gnosticism that he references here, which he makes specific reference to 1983, which we didn't watch, but I can say has a much more overt religious theme that runs through. So the general plot is it's 1983. They've caught the Yorkshire Ripper. They know who it is. But one of the corrupt cops that looked the other way when police brutality was going on starts feeling bad about it, or about covering up the little girl that was murdered that everyone is kind of throwing in with the Ripper, but doesn't fit the pattern because she's a small girl. And uncovers a true detective sort of pedophile ring that is run by a priest.
Yeah, I mean, the way he uses Gnosticism here seems to be very much like generally the material world is a filthy, dirty, dark place that must be washed away, and there's no hope of redeeming except by escape.
To Mark's point, the world is presented as good and evil, and there's a definite darkness that comes along with religiousness.
Yeah, I mean,
and
like
power.
I'd say it's sort of like Sin City, but like not incredibly stupid.
Yeah.
I think True Detective is the best analog. It's good. Yeah, anyway, and then he briefly talks about the movie. You know, I mean, what he says about the movie is essentially it's not an adaptation of the guy's book.
The movie that he's talking about is
The Damned Utd.
The Damned Utd, which is a reference to, I looked this up, it is a movie about a book that he wrote about one of the head managers of Manchester United, who only lasted for 44 days. And he wasn't very good, but it made for this, like, you know, dramatic sports story about the corruption of the industry of football or soccer. And yeah, they just made the movie like they would make the Queen or...
Yeah, I mean, it kind of feels like they made a movie about the events that actually took place and then like bought the rights to use his title to have it associated with that, but otherwise it really wasn't related to the book.
Yeah.
Is the way Mark Fisher seems to describe it.
It reminds me of his problems with the movie Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, in that it doesn't feel lived in, it doesn't feel authentic to the, you know, the text. It kind of saps or takes out pieces, as he says, fractured and abrasive modernism. And he says here, what's missing is everything that peace brought to the facts, the bite of a real that will always elude bourgeois realism, and the shaping power of a Gnostic mythography in which the most malign entity is the cursed land of Yorkshire itself. One thing that comes through in the Red Riding movies, and I presume the novels, I didn't read the novels, is that Yorkshire itself is the main character that is sort of being investigated through all of these literal investigators, journalists, you know, systems of power. And it's The Damned Utd also approaches it from that lens. Like, this is coming out of Yorkshire, this corrupt, dark place that I grew up in and am commenting on through all of these characters. But he doesn't like the Leeds United. It's not Manchester United. It's Leeds United. Is that this movie doesn't do that. It doesn't bring along this kind of darkness. It gives a rosy tint on what, in Mark Fisher's view, is a dark kind of tale of corruption and power and what happens when somebody who's not competent gains some power. I do like his description of, did you catch this about the cereal? On 86, at the press screening, Morgan said that when he read The Damned United, it brought a nostalgia rush, like eating Farley's Rusks, which is a type of like baby cereal.
Okay.
Which I guess would be the equivalent of like eating Raisin Bran or Fruit Loops, but one that doesn't get made anymore and is specific to like an early
Raisin
time.
Bran, who has like fond memories of Raisin Bran? Or like tricks, because you don't eat tricks anymore because you're a fucking adult who knows better.
And Fisher says here, yet surely even the most guileless of the readers of Peace's novel could see that it tastes not of the warm mush of baby food, but of bile, scotch, and reflux stomach acid. Mm-hmm. So, that kind of summarizes his problem with this rendering of it, right. Which is that this almost reactionary nostalgia, like in
Life of Mars.
You have this fond telling of the story as it was and putting on a rosy tinted glasses to view it through, instead of what he views as a much more authentic rendering, like in the BBC Red Riding series.
Yeah.
I also liked what he wrote about sports. This was an interesting commentary because he doesn't usually... I've never read him talk about sports all that much.
Yeah, he rarely discusses sports.
But he says, as every sports fan, never mind about coach, knows, the jouissance of sports is essentially masochistic. And, I mean, that's just, the joy of watching sports is a... I guess
maybe
a type of masochism
fan or whatever.
And he says that deep down, the main character from The Damned United, deep down he knew that winning was only loss deferred, which comes from Chris Petit, not Mark Fisher.
Or it comes from The Wire, because there's that line where the lady goes, "Who's winning, honey?" And Presbelusky says, "No one wins, they just lose slower."
Yeah.
Like that scene in The Wire.
Yeah, we're talking about The Wire a lot.
Yeah.
I think you would like 1980 and 83.
Yeah, probably. I'll probably get around
and
to at some point.
Listeners, it's good. It's one of the few things.
It's a decent show. It's like True Detectives. It's fun.
Well, I mean, Mark Fisher, don't take it from us. Mark Fisher, he says here, moreover, in their use of setting and landscape, in the epiphanic power of their images, the Red Riding films attained a visual poetry and an expressionist naturalism that exceeded practically anything British cinema has achieved in the past 30 years.
Well, yeah, but I mean, obviously, no one's going to argue that. Oh yeah, wow, it's not Guy Ritchie with like a foggy alley or whatever the hell.
I mean, he does have a point that they really do use the landscape.
It's a decent ass show. It's probably, if I was English, I'd think it was the greatest show ever because I've never seen anything like it. But it's a good show.
What did you like about it?
It's a fun little fucking dark detective story. I don't know that in 2022 it necessarily stands out amongst other things that are like it. It's just a good type of those things.
Well, that's the one thing about this is that it seems to almost predict the next 10 years of prestige television. I guess you had Breaking Bad as a really dark anti-hero.
Yeah, okay, so this was what? This was
2009.
2009. So, I mean, you had The Wire, season 1 was out.
Right.
So that was there. There was... I feel like it was in a pack of a lot of things, and, BBC does their things in their own way, where it's like, oh yeah, well, we're going to call this a TV show and just release a 2-hour movie and then release a second one 2 years later. And that's how fucking BBC does shit. So that's sort of the BBC. But yeah, I mean, I feel like it was in a pack of things, and it was, certainly True Detective was not out at the time, and that's what I keep coming back to as my main point of comparison. I think it's good. And yeah, it's just a decent thing that's like that.
Like when you think of gritty Batman movie, or
it's better than Nolan Gritty. It's less stupid than Nolan Gritty. It's gritty, but it's not the dumbest gritty in the world.
The ending was dumb though, from 74.
There's like a lot of dumb things about it still, but it's just good.
Well, you had Andrew Garfield just lighting up.
I like Andrew Garfield. Everyone likes Andrew Garfield. He's good in these things. They should have gotten him in True Detective.
What's the movie you like with him in it?
Under the Banner of Heaven.
Yeah.
Which is a miniseries. Also based on a book that's based on a real thing.
He was also Spider-Man, right?
Yeah.
Alright, we're gonna play you out to some happy music by Throbbing Gristle. Can the world be as sad as it seems? A line by Charles Manson, and the plot of this song is taken from William Burroughs.